The general's aide delivered the order on a Tuesday morning, which was the kind of detail I remember because I had just finished the quarterly commissary reconciliation, and my hands smelled like chalk dust and old ledger paper. The aide was young, professional, and visibly uncomfortable. He set a single folded document on my desk, said "Administrative Attachment Order, sir, cohabitation bond, effective the 1st of next month," and left before I could ask a question. I read it twice. The short version: I was to enter a Velocivar cohabitation bond with the general's youngest daughter, Sovl, classification Osveth, age unspecified but described as young. In exchange, my posting at Frontier Command Kethvaran would be extended by 3 years, and my access to the garrison archive would remain unrestricted. If I declined, the posting ended, the archive access ended, and I would be reassigned to a processing depot on the outer ring with a commendation that said nothing and meant less. I was a Federation Surveylogistics Attaché, grade 3, second lowest posting in the diplomatic corps. I had been at Kethvaran for 3 years because the general needed someone who could read supply manifests in Federation standard without requiring a translator, and I needed a post that would not require me to be useful in any way that involved a weapon or a decision of consequence. We had arrived at a workable arrangement. The garrison archive was the finest collection of Velocivar secondary statute records in the outer corridor, and I was the only human being in 40 light years who found that interesting. I read the order a third time. Cohabitation bond. The Velocivar used them for a number of things: property arrangements, custodial transfers, political alignments. A human entering one with a Velocivar primary house daughter would be unusual, but not impossible. The Federation Compact had provisions for it. The provisions were in the secondary annexes, which I had read because I read everything, but which no one at Frontier Command had opened in living memory. I thought about the outer ring depot. I signed the order. The general met with me the following morning in his operations room. He was tall even by Velocivar standards, pale amber eyes over a face that had spent 40 years in garrison command, and he sat behind his desk with the careful stillness of a man who had already decided what he thought of you and was merely waiting to see if you would confirm it. "You understand what you are accepting," he said. "Yes, General." "Sovl is classified Osveth. You know what that means?" I did. Osveth was the Velocivar designation for a child who had reached assessment age without presenting a threshold function. No combat instinct, no command potential, no navigational gift, no house managing capacity. In practical terms, it meant the Velocivar succession compact had no slot for her. She could not be bonded to a primary house officer. She could not hold a garrison posting in her own right. She would not inherit. The designation carried no formal dishonor, but it carried something that functioned the same way in every room she entered. "I understand," I said. The general looked at me for a moment. "She is 8 seasons," he said. "She is quiet, she has never given trouble." He paused. "She has been told what this arrangement is. She knows you are a Federation attaché. She knows it is administrative." Another pause, shorter. "She will not be difficult." "I don't expect difficulty, General." He held my gaze another 3 seconds. "No," he said finally, "I don't suppose you do." He slid a second document across the desk. "The bonding register, my household adjudicant will witness. The Commission will have no grounds to contest a cohabitation instrument, properly filed under Article 14. I picked up the document. "The Commission, General." Something moved behind his eyes. Not fear, the general had not felt fear in a long time if he ever had. Something closer to a calculation being revised downward. "File the instrument," he said. "Keep your archive access. Keep the posting. In return, the child has Federation custodial cover through your record. That is the arrangement." He did not explain what the commission was. I filed the instrument that afternoon. with the household adjudicant present and the garrison operations log timestamp on the lower left. I put a copy in my personal file and a copy in the garrison archive under the Article 14 cross-reference. I was thorough about filings. It was, by that point in my career, one of the few things I was reliably good at. I met Sovl the next morning. She was standing in the administrative corridor outside my office when I arrived, which was earlier than most of the garrison stirred because I liked the archive before the day cycle lights came to full brightness. She was small, smaller than I had expected, though I had not known what to expect. Lavender skin, the pale dusty kind that the Highland-born Velocivar sometimes carried, not the deep indigo of primary house garrison officers. Silver-white hair pulled back with a cord that was slightly too long for her, pointed ears. Oversized gray administrative tunic that had been taken in at the sides with uneven stitches, probably her own work. She looked at me with pale gray eyes and said nothing. I said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning, Attaché Kale." Her Vel standard was precise. The pronunciation of my name was exact in a way that suggested she had practiced it. "Davin," I said, "you can call me Davin." She considered this. "Davin," she said, trying it out like a tool she was not sure she trusted yet. Then she looked at the door behind me. "Is that the archive?" "The outer office. The archive is through the inner door." "May I see it?" I opened the door. She walked in ahead of me and stood in the middle of the outer office. 4 desks, 3 of them unoccupied, one of them mine with its stacked ledgers and chalk dust, and the smell of old paper that had been in my clothes so long I had stopped noticing it until someone else walked into the room. She turned in a slow circle, looking at everything. "It smells like the commissary annex in the South Block," she said. "Chalkstone buildings and old paper smell similar. There are more ledgers here." "Yes." She looked at my desk. "Are those the supply manifests?" "Quarterly commissary reconciliation. I finished yesterday." She walked to the desk, did not touch the ledgers but leaned slightly forward and read the top page. Her eyes moved down the columns in a way that was not casual. "Column 4 is wrong," she said. I looked at the column. I had checked it twice. "Where?" She pointed without touching. "The allocation figure for the South Block protein stores carries forward from the previous quarter's adjusted figure, but the adjustment was a field correction, not a baseline change. Your carry forward should use the original baseline." I looked at the figure. I looked at the previous quarter. I looked back. She was correct. I stood there for a moment in the chalk-smelling quiet of the outer office, and something settled in me that had been unsettled since the aide had come to my desk on Tuesday. "Sit down," I said. "I'll show you how the reconciliation works." Those first weeks were ordinary in all the ways that mattered. I had a small apartment in the administrative block, 2 rooms, clean and impersonal as all garrison housing. There was a cot in the second room that had not been used. Sovl moved into it with a single bag and set 3 small stones on the windowsill, pale, flat, one with a dark mineral stripe, and that was how I knew she had decided she was staying. She was quiet. The general had not been wrong about that. She did not fill silence the way some children do. She sat at the secondary desk in the outer office every morning and worked through whatever I put in front of her with a patience that felt old for someone her size. She learned the commissary reconciliation format in 4 days. On the 5th day, she found a second error I had not caught. On the 6th day, she asked if she could see the garrison archive. The garrison archive occupied the inner 3 rooms of the administrative block. 40 years of Velocivar Frontier Command records, the last 20 of them including Federation, secondary statute cross-references that I had been adding because I was thorough, and no one had told me not to. It was not organized. Velocivar record-keeping used a categorization system that had evolved over 400 years and was internally consistent in the way that living things are consistent. Everything connected. Nothing labeled the way an outsider would expect. Sovl walked through it slowly on that first visit, hands at her sides. She did not touch anything. She looked at the spines, the shelf markings, the filing codes on the folded documents in the flat drawer sections. She moved through the 3 rooms in about 20 minutes, and when she came back to the outer office she said, "The secondary statute cross-references are filed in a different system than the garrison records. I added them. I used Federation filing convention." "Why do you cross-reference the secondary statutes to the garrison records?" "Because the garrison records sometimes reference the statutes indirectly, and I wanted to be able to follow the references." She thought about this. Does anyone else use the archive? No. She thought about this too. Then she went back to the commissary reconciliation and did not ask another question until the afternoon when she looked up and said, "The secondary statute cross-reference system. Can you teach me how it works?" I taught her. It took 4 days, because the system I had built was idiosyncratic, and I had not needed to explain it to anyone before. Explaining it out loud to someone who was following everything I said, and asking precise questions about the parts that were not fully consistent turned out to make me realize that 2 sections of it were not fully consistent, and Sovl pointed both of them out on the 3rd day without appearing to notice she was doing it. "Why is this category separate from this one?" she asked, pointing to a section of the cross-reference shelf. "They reference the same primary documents." "Historical accident," I said. "I built that section 2 years before I built this one, and I didn't go back." She looked at both sections. "If they were combined, you could find related references in 1 search instead of 2. "Yes." "Should I combine them?" I thought about it. "Not yet. Understand the whole system first. Then we can think about improving it." She turned back to the shelf. "All right." She reached out and touched the spine of one of the documents with a single fingertip, the way you touch something to confirm it is real. "I will understand the whole system first." She meant it. Over the following weeks she worked through the cross-reference archive the way she worked through the commissary reconciliation, methodically, thoroughly, asking questions when something was unclear, and not asking questions when she could reason her way to the answer herself. She kept a small notebook in which she wrote things she wanted to think about further. I did not read the notebook. It was hers. There was a morning, about 6 weeks in, when I came to the office and found she had arrived before me. She was sitting at the secondary desk with the garrison's 3-year supply manifest open in front of her, the one I kept because the commissary cross-reference required it, and she had found something. "The South Block grain reserve," she said when I came in. "The quarterly allocation doesn't match the annual target figure. It's not a column error. The annual target was changed at some point, but the quarterly figure was not updated to match." I looked. She was right. The discrepancy was small, about 4%, but it was the kind of error that compounded over time, and I had not seen it because I had been working from the quarterly figures and had not compared them against the annual target in the last review cycle. "When do you think it happened?" I said. 18 months ago. The annual target figure changes in the middle of that year's record. The quarterly figures don't change." I pulled the relevant archive files. It took about 20 minutes to trace the origin. It was a field correction from a supply run that had been applied to the wrong figure. Someone had updated the annual target when they should have updated a one-time field record. "That's a good catch," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "It matters how much grain is in the South Block." "It does. If the figure is wrong for 18 months, the actual reserve is different from what the record says." "Yes, I'll send a correction to the commissary officer today." She looked at the manifest. "Can I come when you send it?" I looked at her. She was watching the manifest with the expression she had when she was working something out, not worry, not urgency, something more careful than either. "Why?" I want to understand how a correction is processed, how the record changes. So she came with me to the commissary office, a narrow room on the south side of the garrison run by a Velocivar warrant officer named Oral Keth, who had been there for 12 years and had the look of a man who had made his peace with everything. He took the correction, looked at it, looked at Sovl and looked back at me. "She found it," he said. "Yes." Oral Keth made a sound that was not quite a word and filed the correction with the timestamp and the notation of source. He gave a copy to Sovl without being asked. She took it carefully, both hands, and read it on the way back to the office. "The timestamp matters," she said. "It establishes when the correction was made. So if there's a question later about the record, you can see when the error was identified and corrected. So the record is honest even about its own mistakes. That's the idea." She thought about this for the rest of the walk back. At the office door she stopped. "Is it always like that, with all records?" "In good record keeping, yes." She went inside. I heard her sit down at the secondary desk. After a moment she said, through the inner door, "Then a record that is honest about its mistakes is more trustworthy than one that isn't, because you can see where it went wrong and how it was corrected." "Yes." A long pause. "That is a good system," she said, the way she said things that had settled somewhere important, and then she opened the notebook and wrote something in it. The commission arrived in the 7th month. I was in the archive when the garrison adjutant knocked and said there were 4 officers from the Velocivar Succession Compact Recovery Commission at the main gate requesting entry under Administrative Instrument Order 7 KARRETH OSS 41. I knew the instrument numbering convention. I had read the Succession Compact twice, and I knew that OSS instruments were operative orders rather than advisory requests. I went to the gate. There were 4 of them, Velocivar, garrison formal in pale gray, the lead officer a woman named Orvan Keth, whose rank insignia put her at grade 7 commission advocate. She had the look of someone who had been doing this exact job for a long time and had stopped finding it unpleasant. Behind her, the other 3 officers held sealed document cases. "Attaché Kale," she said. "Federation Grade 3, Survey Logistics. I have an operative instrument for the removal and reassignment of Sovl, Osveth, daughter register entry of General Kethvaran Osavar. From Federation custodial cover under Cohabitation Bond Article 14, on the grounds that an Osveth classification at threshold age represents a dissolution of primary house standing, which voids the bond's protective application." She said it the way people recite things they have recited many times. "The instrument is properly filed. The bond is hereby suspended pending reassignment proceedings." I looked at the document she extended toward me. I said, "May I have until morning to review the instrument?" She looked at me with polite neutrality. 24 hours at Attaché, standard review window. I took the document and went back to the archive. I had not told Sovl about the commission before they arrived because I had not known they were coming, and I had not known they were coming because the general had told me nothing. In retrospect, the general's mention of the commission on the day I signed the order was the closest he had come to warning me. I thought about that while I walked back through the garrison. When I got to the outer office, Sovl was at the secondary desk with a secondary statute cross-reference that she had pulled herself, working through it with the deliberate patience she brought to everything. She had been doing this for weeks, pulling documents from the archive on her own, reading them, putting them back with careful precision. I had stopped commenting on it because she was always careful, and because she had started leaving small notes in the margin spaces of my cross-reference logs when she found a reference I had missed. The notes were in her cramped, improving handwriting, always precise, never more than a line or 2. She looked up, she saw my face. "The commission," she said. Not a question. "Yes." She looked back at the document in front of her. Her hands on the desk were still. "Father said they would come," she said. "He said the bond would slow them. He did not say it would stop them." I sat down at my desk. "He might have mentioned that to me." "He thought you knew." A pause. "He thinks everyone who reads things knows everything." I looked at the instrument in my hand. "Can you tell me what the commission does? What the reassignment means?" She was quiet for a moment. "Osveth without a bond cover go to the secondary registry," she said. "They are reclassified as administrative dependents of the succession compact. They receive a post-assignment based on function assessment." Another pause. "I have not passed a function assessment." "What happens if you don't pass one?" She did not answer that. The silence said what needed saying. I put the commission's instrument on my desk and opened it. Then I pulled the succession compact from the secondary statute shelf, the full text with annotations, 3 volumes, and I started reading. She did not ask what I was looking for. She pulled the second volume from the shelf herself and opened it at the founding charter section, which told me she already knew which part of the compact was relevant. We worked in the chalk-smelling quiet of the outer office without speaking, and outside the garrison's afternoon cycle light shifted through the windows, and I read. I read through the night. I was thorough by nature and thorough by training, and I had learned early in my posting at Kethvaren that the Velocivar secondary statute system was organized the way the garrison archive was organized. Everything connected, nothing labeled the way you expected, cross-references buried in subclauses that had not been looked at in decades because the people who used the primary document had not needed the subclauses and therefore had assumed they were not there. The commission's instrument was legally clean. Advocate Orvanketh had not made a procedural error. The Osveth dissolution provision was in Article 7 of the Succession Compact, Section 4, and the language was clear. Primary house standing depended on threshold designation, and a cohabitation bond could not substitute for threshold designation once the commission had filed an operative instrument. I read Article 7 twice. Then I read Article 8, which was the appeals provision. The appeals provision required a counterinstrument from a sovereign-level authority, and the only sovereign-level authority in the outer corridor was the compact itself. That door was closed. Then I read the commission's founding charter. I had it in the secondary statute section, because I had cross-referenced it 2 years ago on a slow afternoon when I had run out of other things to file. The founding charter was 406 years old. It was the document that had created the commission and defined its powers and set the boundaries of its authority. Primary document lawyers read it. Advocates like Orvanketh knew it well. The main body of it was well understood. But I had also read the writer documents. The founding charter had 6 writer documents appended to it. Most writers were operational, funding procedures, reporting requirements, the kind of administrative attachment that accumulates around any institutional document over 400 years. Nobody read writers. Writers were the footnotes to the footnotes, the supporting documentation for the supporting documentation. They existed because the people who created the charter had been careful, and care generates paperwork. I had read the writers because I read everything. I had read them at the same slow afternoon 2 years ago, filed them in my secondary statute cross-reference under compact writers, provisioning and operations, and not thought about them again. Now I pulled out Writer 6. Writer 6 was a provisioning agreement between the Succession Compact and the primary house garrison commands of the outer corridor, dated 7 years after the founding charter. 39 sections of granular financial governance, the kind of document that made even thorough readers' eyes slide past the columns. Section 40 was an indemnification clause. Section 41 was dispute resolution. Section 42 was a protection clause. Section 42, paragraph 3. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I sat very still in the archive for about 4 minutes with the writer open on my desk, and the night cycle ventilation moving in the walls and nothing else. Section 42, paragraph 3 read, in cases where an operative instrument is filed against a primary house dependent, whose classification as OSVETH was assessed and recorded prior to the dependent's 8th season, the Commission's instrument shall be void unless accompanied by a co-countersignature from the primary house sovereign commander of the corridor in which the garrison operates. This provision applies without limitation or exception, and takes precedence over all subsequent compact amendments, not specifically referencing this subsection. I looked at the Commission's instrument. There was no co-countersignature from the sovereign commander of the outer corridor. I checked the date on Sovl's OSVETH classification. The General's administrative record had it in the garrison archive. I had filed it myself 3 years ago when I was cross-referencing the garrison's personnel records to the secondary statute register, adding it because it was a personnel record that referenced a classification status that intersected with compact statute, and I was thorough about those intersections. She had been classified at 6 seasons, 2 seasons before the threshold, before the age at which OSVETH was a settled conclusion rather than a preliminary note. The provision had been written specifically for that case, primary house children classified early, before the full threshold assessment, sent into the OSVETH designation before they had finished being whatever they were going to be. Someone had looked at the Commission's founding instrument 406 years ago and had seen a gap through which a child could fall, and had written a paragraph in a provisioning rider to close it, and had made that paragraph take precedence over everything. The Commission's founding charter had been amended 11 times since then. I had cross-referenced all 11 amendments. Not one of them contained the words Section 42 or Paragraph 3 or early classification or co-countersignature requirement. Not one. The provision was intact. It had been sitting in the rider for 400 years, unreferenced, undisturbed, waiting for someone to read it. The instrument was void. It had been void from the moment Unwanted filed it. I went to Sovl's room. It was past the 3rd hour of night cycle. I knocked on the door because I knocked on doors. She was awake. She was sitting on the cot with one of the flat stones from the windowsill in her hand, and when I came in she looked at me with those pale gray eyes that had been watching everything since the first morning in the corridor, and she waited. I sat down on the floor of her room, which was the only other place to sit, and I put the provisioning rider and the garrison personnel record on the floor between us. When were you classified OSVETH? I said. 6 seasons, she said. Did you know that mattered? Father knew. He told me it might matter later, but he did not know how. I turned the provisioning rider so she could read it. She leaned forward off the cot and read Section 42, Paragraph 3. Her lips moved slightly. She read it again. Then she looked at me. The Commission doesn't know this provision exists, I said. Or they know it exists and they believe no one will find it, because it is in the provisioning rider for the founding charter, and no one reads provisioning riders. She was quiet for a moment. Her thumb moved over the flat stone in her hand, a small automatic motion, the kind of motion that means a person is holding something steady in themselves. You read provisioning riders, she said. I read everything. She looked at the document on the floor. Will it hold? It takes precedence over all subsequent amendments not specifically referencing it. None of the subsequent amendments reference it. Yes, it will hold. Another silence. The night cycle ventilation moved somewhere in the walls, that low, steady pressure sound that became invisible after your first week in a garrison building. How did you find it? She said. I cross-referenced the founding charter to the archive 2 years ago because I had nothing else to do that afternoon. I paused. You have been reading the secondary statute cross-references for the past 3 months. Yes. Did you find it? She looked at me directly. The flat stone was still in her hand. I found section 42, she said. I didn't know what paragraph 3 meant for me specifically because I did not know exactly when I had been classified. I knew it was early. I was going to ask you what the garrison record said. A pause. I did not want to ask. I understood that. I did not say so because she did not need me to. In the morning, I said, I'm going to go to the main gate with this document and the garrison record and tell Advocate Unwanted that her instrument is void under the founding charter's own rider. She'll verify it. She's professional, she won't contest a primary provision. I looked at the document on the floor. It ends there. Sovl looked at the stone in her hand for a moment. Then she set it on the floor beside the provisioning rider, gently at a specific angle, the way she set things down when she was marking something. A record, a kept thing. She reads the records to know what is there, she said. It was not entirely to me, not to confirm what she already thinks. That's how you do it, yes. She picked the stone back up. She did not say anything else. I gathered the documents, got up off the floor, and went back to the archive to write the cross-reference note, how I had found it, where it was, what it meant, so that the record would show the work and not just the result. I arrived at the main gate at the first hour of morning cycle. Unwanted was already there, or already available. Commission advocates at frontier postings learn to be early because the garrison day starts early. She came out of the overnight accommodation with a cup of something warm and the expression of someone who expected the next 20 minutes to be routine. I handed her the provisioning rider, open to section 42. She read it standing up, cup still in her hand, the way a person reads something they expect to understand quickly. She read paragraph 3. She read it again. She looked up at me. Do you have the classification record? I handed her the garrison personnel entry. She looked at the date. She looked at paragraph 3 again. Her expression did not change, which was professionalism, but something shifted in the quality of her stillness. The stillness of a person recalculating. The instrument is void, I said. I see that. She read it a third time. This time I thought she was calculating rather than verifying, working out what the void meant for the filing record, for her own report, for the Commission's case log. This provision is in the provisioning rider for the founding charter. Section 42, paragraph 3, yes. No one has invoked it before. It has never been relevant before, or it has been relevant and no one had access to the founding charter's rider documents. I paused. They are in the garrison archive. She looked at me. You read the provisioning rider for the Succession Compact's founding charter. I cross-referenced secondary statutes. It's my posting. Unwanted held my gaze for a moment. She was not angry. She was not even, I thought, particularly surprised in the way that implies blame. She had done her job cleanly and encountered something that made it void, and she was deciding how to close the file. I'll need to file the instrument suspension. It takes 48 hours for the commission record to update. I understand. The bond remains in effect under Article 14. I know. She gave me back the documents. She looked past me toward the garrison buildings for a moment, then back. Attaché Kale, the child, she paused. She is Osveth. She is classified Osveth. Unwanted held my gaze. Something in her expression shifted very slightly, not sympathy exactly, but something adjacent to a recognition that the category she had been operating with for a long time was not the whole picture. The classification doesn't change because the instrument is void. No, I said, but the provision protects her regardless of the classification. That was the point of writing it. She nodded once, professional and finished. Good morning, attaché. She went back inside. I walked back through the garrison with the provisioning rider and the personnel record under my arm, in the early morning light that came flat and pale amber through the chalkstone corridors, and I thought about what Sovl had said the night before. She reads the records to know what is there. and about the stone placed on the floor beside the document like a marker. The general came to the administrative block the afternoon of the second day, which surprised me because the general did not come to the administrative block. He stood in the doorway of the outer office with his hands at his sides in the particular way of a person who has decided to be somewhere and has not yet decided what to do once they arrived. Sovl was at the secondary desk. She looked at him and waited. "The commission filed for suspension," the general said. He was speaking to me, but he was looking at her. 48-hour processing. "I know," I said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the shelves, the ledgers, the cross-reference files. He looked at the secondary desk where his youngest daughter sat with a secondary statute document open in front of her, and chalk marks on her left hand from the categorization work she had been doing that morning on the outer wall. He had the expression of a man encountering something that did not fit the shape he had given it. "The provision was in the rider," he said, not a question. He had been told, he had thought about it. Section 42, paragraph 3. "Yes. I did not know it was there. Most people don't." Another silence. He looked at Sovl again. She met his gaze without any particular expression, the way she looked at things she was assessing. He looked away first, which I thought cost him something, though I could not have said what. "You have been teaching her the archive system," he said to me. "She learned it," I answered questions. He looked at the document on her desk. "What is she reading?" "The Succession Compact Secondary Rider Set," she said. Her voice was level. "Riders 2 through 5. I finished 6 yesterday." The general was still for 3 full seconds. "You read the rider," he said. "Davin reads the riders. I read what Davin reads." A pause. "I found section 42 on my own. I did not know about paragraph 3 because I did not know my classification date. Davin found paragraph 3 and the personnel record." The general looked at me. I said nothing. He looked at the secondary desk, the cross-reference files, the chalk marks on his daughter's hand, and I thought he was working out an arithmetic that had not occurred to him before. What a child looked like when she had been given a desk and shown that the thing in front of her was worth reading. Whatever he found in that arithmetic, he kept it. "Good," he said, which was a word that seemed to surprise him slightly as he said it. Then he left. Sovl watched the doorway for a moment after he was gone. Then she turned back to the rider in front of her. "Rider 3, she said, "has a cross-reference to Article 14 that I have not found in your index yet. Show me when you finish the section." She turned the page and went back to reading. 3 days later, I filed the Section 42 citation in the Federation Secondary Statute Record, cross-reference to the Garrison Archive and to my own personnel file. I wrote a 1-page summary of the provision, its history, and its current applicability, and I filed it under the Federation Compact Supplementary Case Register, where it would be accessible to any attaché who needed it. It was a small document. It took about 20 minutes to write. I did not tell Sovl I had done it. She found it herself 2 weeks later in the process of working through my recent cross-reference editions, and she came to the outer office doorway and stood there for a moment. "You filed it in the Federation Supplementary Register," she said. "So the next time it's relevant, someone can find it." She looked at the document in her hand, which was a copy she had made herself, careful lettering in a slightly cramped hand that was getting more confident each month. "No one may need it for 100 years. Someone may need it next year. I don't know. The point is that it's findable." She thought about that. Then she went back to the secondary desk and set the copy down and went back to work. That was the autumn of her 8th season. In the month that followed, she began correcting not just my arithmetic but my subclause indexing. The way I had organized the cross-references, which she thought was logical but could be improved by a secondary categorization system, she had worked out on her own, based on the Velocivar native filing system, but modified for the way I actually used the documents. She explained it to me on a Tuesday afternoon with a piece of chalk on the administrative block's outer wall, drawing the categorization tree the way someone draws something they have had in their head for a long time and is finally being asked to say out loud. It was a better system than mine. I told her so. She looked at the drawing without quite hiding the expression of someone who had hoped to hear that, but had not let herself count on it. It needs a third level, she said, turning back to the wall, for documents that are primary in one context and secondary in another. I haven't worked out the third level yet. Take your time. She erased a section of the drawing and redrew it. The commission will come back, she said, not looking at me. Not Unwanted, a different instrument, a different advocate. Probably. Will there be another provision? I don't know, I'll keep reading. She considered this. Then she picked up the chalk and started on the third level. So will I, she said. The instrument suspension was confirmed by the Commission's central record 41 hours after Unwanted filed it, 1 hour inside the standard window. I know this because I received a copy of the confirmation as the Federation attaché of record, and I filed it in the Garrison archive under the cross-reference for Section 42, Paragraph 3, and then I made a second copy and put it in my own file, and a third copy which I left on Sovl's desk without comment. She put it in her notebook without comment. In the years that followed, there were 2 more commission instruments. The first came 18 months after the first suspension, filed on different grounds, not the Osveth dissolution provision, but a jurisdictional argument claiming that the cohabitation bond had been improperly witnessed, because the garrison adjudicant who had witnessed it was operating under a temporary commission rather than a permanent one. I found the rebuttal in the Federation Compact's administrative witness provision, Section 11, Subclause 4, which explicitly validates temporary commission witnesses for cohabitation bonds in all frontier postings. The subclause had been added 23 years ago after a dispute in the Northern Corridor, and no one at the Commission had apparently connected it to the question of bond witnessing. 19 minutes after the instrument arrived, I filed the rebuttal and sent Unwanted's successor a copy of the relevant text. The second came 2 years after that, based on an argument about the residency clause of the bond, whether the physical proximity requirement had been maintained throughout the prior year, during a period when I had been on a supply verification assignment to the outer relay station for 11 days. I found the rebuttal in the same provisioning rider as the first one, Section 38, which specified that cohabitation bonds for administrative attachés on active posting maintained their validity during assignment periods not exceeding 30 days, provided the custodial notation remained active in the garrison record. My custodial notation had remained active because I maintained all my notations and Sovl had been maintaining hers since the month after the first suspension, when she had asked me to show her how the notation system worked. After the third instrument was suspended, the Commission stopped filing. Unwanted sent a single administrative note to the garrison address, not to me personally, to the address, which said, Succession Compact Recovery Commission declines further operative instruments in this matter. File closed. It was dated and stamped and said nothing else. I filed it under Section 42. Sovl was in the archive when I did it, and she watched me file it and did not say anything. But I heard her, a few minutes later, take a long, slow breath in the inner room, the kind of breath that is a person setting something down that they have been carrying for a while without acknowledging the weight. Sovl was 12 seasoned when she found the third-level solution for the categorization system. She came to my office in the early morning with chalk on her hands and 3 pieces of paper covered in her own cross-reference notation, which by then was more organized and more precise than mine had ever been, the result of 4 years of reading everything in the archive and thinking about the way categories held and failed, and showed me how the third level worked. It used a bridging code that identified documents with dual context standing and routed them to both primary categories without duplication. The bridge was not visible from either primary category. It existed in a secondary index that updated automatically when new documents were added, so the system stayed accurate without requiring anyone to maintain the bridge manually. It was elegant in the way that solutions are elegant when someone has been thinking about them for a long time and has finally found the right geometry. I looked at it for a long time. "This is not a modification of my system," I said. "No, I kept your framework, but the third level required a different underlying logic." She looked at the papers. "Is it correct?" "It's better than correct. It solves a problem the original system didn't know it had." She made a small sound that might have been satisfaction, or might have been something she did not have a word for yet. "I want to apply it to the archive," she said. "All right. It will take several months. The archive has been waiting 40 years. It can wait a few more months." She gathered the papers. She was still for a moment in the chalk-smelling morning light of the outer office, in the way she was sometimes still, not absence, the opposite of absence, the kind of stillness that means something is being held, attended to. "Davin," she said. "Yes." "The provision in the rider, Section 42. "Yes." "It was written for children like me," she said. "Someone wrote it 406 years ago because they thought it was important." "Yes." "They couldn't have known it would be needed at Kethvaran." "No." "But they wrote it carefully enough that it would work whenever it was needed." She looked at the papers in her hands. The chalk on her fingers had dried to a pale residue, the same color as the walls. "I want to do work like that, work that holds when someone finally needs it." I thought about the Federation Supplementary Register, the one-page summary filed under a cross-reference that might sit untouched for a decade or a century. I thought about the categorization tree on the wall and the third-level bridging code, and 4 years of early mornings in an archive that smelled like chalk dust, and the 3 stones on the windowsill, and a small notebook that I had never read, and a child who had been told she was nothing, and had treated that information as a problem to work on rather than a fact to accept. "That's the only kind worth doing," I said. She looked at me with those gray eyes that had never missed anything since the first morning in the corridor, and she nodded once, the nod of someone who has just heard a thing confirmed that they already knew but wanted to hear said out loud. Then she went to the inner door of the archive with her 3 pages and her chalk-dusted hands, and got to work. I sat down at my desk and opened the commissary reconciliation for the quarter. Outside, the pale amber light of the 4th-month sun came through the administrative block windows and lay flat and steady on the floor between my desk and hers, and the garrison went about its day, and the archive held everything it had been given, and we read. There is one thing I did not tell Sovl until much later, in the 2nd year of her posting at the Federation Compact's secondary statute office in the inner corridor, when she wrote to ask me how I had known to read the provisioning rider in the first place. She was 22 seasons by then, and she had a desk of her own and a cross-reference system that had already been adopted by 3 outer corridor postings. And she was asking, I thought, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to hear me say it. I wrote back, I didn't know. I read it because it was there. I read the writers the same way I read everything because something in them might matter and I couldn't tell in advance which thing. She wrote back 3 days later, that is what I thought you would say. Then, the founding compact office has a position open for a secondary statute archivist. The archive here is poorly organized. I have been told it would take years to improve. I thought you might find that interesting. I looked at that for a while. I thought about the outer ring depot, the possibility I had weighed once at a desk with supply manifest chalk on my hands. I thought about the administrative block at Kethvaran with its chalk stone walls and its pale amber morning light, and the way a small person had stood in the corridor one morning and looked at a door with gray eyes that missed nothing. I wrote back, "Send me the filing codes for the archive's current categorization system. I'll want to understand it before I arrive." Her reply came the next morning. It contained the filing codes, all 14 categories, and below them a single line: "There is a secondary desk. I have already left it clear." I filed a transfer request the same afternoon and gave my notice to the garrison adjutant and began packing the secondary statute cross-reference files, which took 4 days because I had been adding to them for 6 years and they were extensive. I packed the provisioning rider last, in its own case, cross-reference to everything it had touched. On the last morning, I went through the archive one final time to confirm everything was in order. The new cross-reference system, Sovl system, the third-level version applied to 40 years of garrison records, was clean and consistent in a way the archive had not been before. A person who did not know it could learn it in an afternoon. A person who did know it could find anything in 10 minutes. I turned off the lights and closed the inner door. On the secondary desk, where she had sat for 4 years, there were 3 small stones. Pale, flat, one with a dark mineral stripe. She had left them there, I thought, to mark the place the work had started, so the record would know where to look. I left them where they were,